What's it called?
Sorry?
Is it Dom night? Or do you have a name?
What is it? It's not. No, it's just Thursday. We've been
Okay, so we're going to make a start. Or we'll make a start in a moment or two. So people are joining us now. So I'm Paramabandhu, and this is Jnanavaca. So welcome to tonight's hybrid class. People in the room here and people online. So those of you online, if you'd like to, if anybody would like to say hello, tell me where you're from. It's always nice to know where people are coming in from. And maybe Ippolit will tell me if who's doing the tech.
I'll tell you for now we have 17 people with us, but none of them have told us where they're from.
So that's
Who have we got?
So far no one's talking.
Nobody's talking at all. Oh well, do put your name and say hi in the chat box. Yeah. Do say hi. Come on in. Hi.
Welcome.
So we're going to be trying to talk to both audiences on that.
Which should be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those of you online, we've got what is a COVID shrine full, that is in the sense of physical distancing in the shrine room. So not our normal numbers that we would have on a class like this, but it's really lovely to have you here with us tonight. So in a moment I'll make a start by saluting the shrine, and then I'll say what we're going to be doing tonight.
Great. So yeah, a few people have joined us.
Good.
Richard from North Wales.
Hi Richard from North Wales.
Nina Allen from New York City.
Nina. Thank you for your letter, Nina, and your gifts. Very nice that you could join us again. That's great.
Special friend of Jnanavaca from New York. Hi Nina.
A few people from the UK in Seddon, Norfolk, Veronica in Essex.
Hello.
Richard from just over the road in Canary Dwarf.
Okay, someone from Canary Dwarf over the road. That's very good. Hi Richard. Great. Okay, so let's make a start. I'm going to salute the shrine. So if you'd like to join me.
Disappear off camera.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Sankhaya.
Namo Sankhaya.
Namo Namah.
Namo Namah.
So, yeah, really warm welcome to tonight's class. So, I'm Paramabandhu. This is Jnanavaca.
Hello from me.
Luckily, we live together upstairs, so we're able to touch knees for the occasion, which is just as well. It's a bit hard to get both of us into the screen here. So, yeah, I'm just going to say what we're going to be doing tonight. So our main thing tonight is we're going to be hearing about one of the most interesting immediate disciples of the Buddha, which is someone called Angulimala. And Angulimala, just to say a little bit, but hopefully not to, interfere with what you're going to say. So just say his name. So Angulimala. So Anguli means finger, and a mala is, it's like a rosary, or in this case, a garland. So Angulimala was famous for wearing a garland of fingers, and these were on people that he'd killed. So yes, we're going to hear about a murderer who becomes a disciple of the Buddha. So we can look forward to that. So yeah, that's our theme for tonight, Angulimala. And Jnanavaca is going to talk about that. Before that, I'll lead us through a 15-minute period of meditation. Jnanavaca will speak after the meditation. We'll then have a little leg stretch, and then after that we'll take questions. So we'll take questions from here, from you in the room, but also from you online. You just write them into the chat box and Hippolyte will pass them on to us. Okay, so if you'd like to get yourself set up for meditation, and I'll just lead us through a mindfulness meditation. So we can just start by having a sense of awareness dropping into the body. In a sense of awareness descending, filling our body. And bring our awareness down to where there's contact with the ground. So our feet, perhaps our lower legs, depending how we're sitting. So you can feel the support of the ground beneath us. And taking awareness to the legs, noticing if there's any holding on in the thighs. And if there is, we can just allow that to release. And bring the awareness to contact with the cushions or chair. Then allowing the chair or cushions to take our weight. Awareness to the back and the spine. And a sense of the body being upright, but without straining. We could imagine a cord from the crown of the head to the ceiling, as our head were suspended from the ceiling. And then taking awareness to the face, allowing the face to soften. And bring awareness to the shoulders, the neck, and if we notice there's holding on there, allowing that to release. And bring attention to the arms and the hands. Just checking we've got our hands supported by our lap or a cushion or a blanket, so that we can let go of the arms. And bring awareness to the belly, and to the chest, feeling the movements of breathing. And then just noticing how you're feeling right now. See if you can tune into whatever's going on. And letting that be there. And then bring our attention again onto the breath. And we'll just spend some time following the movements of the breath, feeling the breathing. And just experience the breath going all the way into the body, coming all the way out again. And if you notice that your mind has wandered off, just recognizing where your mind has gone to, and then returning your attention to the breath. And as we continue to pay attention to the breath, see if we can notice what the breath is like, whether it's deep or shallow, rough or smooth, whether there are pleasant or unpleasant sensations associated with it. Just noticing and feeling whatever's there. just as best we can, being interested in the breath, the sensations and the qualities of the sensations. Just bringing the meditation to a close. Open your eyes when you're ready. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Jnanavaca.
Good, a very warm welcome from me too. Thank you, Paramabandhu. Really lovely actually to be doing these hybrid classes. I've just done, I think I've done 2 hybrid classes, and it still feels a novelty for me. So really lovely to see you here in the Shrine Room, and really nice to know that we've got more people listening, watching at home. I can't see you, but I'll try and keep looking at the camera. I'll try and, anyway, if I don't look at you, like either I'm not looking at you in the room, or I'm not looking at you at home, then forgive me for that. We'll do our best. So, yes, I want to tell the story, as Paramabandhu was saying, of one of the Buddha's disciples, and perhaps one of his most, well, you use the word interesting disciples, perhaps one of his most notorious disciples, Angulimala, who... Paramabandhu's already given away that he's a serial killer. He's a serial killer. And so 2,500 years ago, in India, northern India, where the Buddha was teaching, roaming, there's a city called Savatthi, a town, city maybe even, called Savatthi. We've been to Savatthi, haven't we?
We have. We've visited it.
And it's not much of a city now. It's like a bit of a ruin. Nothing really there. You wouldn't go out of your way to go to Savatthi unless you were sort of a Buddhist trying to track down some of the footsteps of the Buddha. Anyway, Savatthi at the time of the Buddha was a flourishing town, and the Buddha often stayed there. So he's in the vicinity of Savatthi, and there's a crisis in the locality because there's a serial killer on the loose. And he's been picking off his victims one at a time. He seems to be working on his own, and he's caused such panic in the area that entire villages have been vacated. You know, people have left their homes and run away from this area around Savatthi. And the king of the sort of region is a king called Paramabandhu, who's actually a disciple of the Buddha as well, and a patron, you know, and supporter of the Buddha. And King Paramabandhu is concerned about this serial killer who has been given the name Angulimala, and he's sent out a whole troop. He sent out a troop of 500 military men to catch Angulimala. Yeah, so that's the sort of starting point of our story. And Angulimala has murdered person after person. He seems to be quite indiscriminate. Man, woman, children, he just doesn't seem to discriminate. And he often wanders around in the forests, in the jungles, around the area of Savatthi. So the Buddha's staying in Savatthi, and he must be aware of this panic that's been going on. So he decides to go for a walk at dusk. Maybe it's a bit darker than dusk. Maybe there's a moon, sort of moonlit night. He decides to go for a walk in the woods where Angulimala is said to be hiding out. The people of the surrounding, as the Buddha passes people, they just say, "Where are you going?" They'll know of the Buddha. Some of them will be followers of the Buddha. Some of them might not be, but they're all concerned. "Where are you going, Lord?" Or "Where are you going, monk?" And the Buddha says, "Oh, I'm just going for a mindful walk in the forest." And they say, no, do not enter the forest. Do not enter it. Particularly don't enter it after dark. Just don't go there. There's a notorious serial killer, and he's noted for not just killing people, but sort of dismembering them, or maybe not completely dismembering them. He takes their little finger, just one little finger from each person, and and he leaves the rest. Yeah. Anyway, don't go into the forest, whatever you do. And the Buddha doesn't take any heed. He sort of just mindfully, very calmly, continues on his way and enters into this, the lair of Angulimala, into this forest. Okay, so I'm going to leave the Buddha in the forest for a moment, potentially at the mercy of Angulimala, and sort of backtrack as to who this Angulimala, this serial killer, is. And we've got a number of different sources, Pali sources, but also Sanskrit sources, telling us about Angulimala. He's become such a notorious disciple of the Buddha that I believe there's even a Bollywood film made called Angulimala. Yeah. So he's quite a character in the Buddhist sort of canon. And, well, who was he? Well, apparently he was born to the chaplain to the king. So possibly King Pasenadi. I'm not completely sure if it was Pasenadi who was ruler at the time that Angulimala was born, but possibly. Anyway, the king had a chaplain, and this was the chaplain's son. And when he was born, there were omens in the sky, in the air, and the seer who read those omens said that he was going to become a notorious bandit. Yeah. So his father and parents gave him the name Ahingsaka, which means he who does no harm. He who does no harm. He who's completely harmless. In the hope of changing, the sort of fate, the destiny that had been predicted for their son. And apparently Ahingsaka grows up to be very popular. He's very handsome, he's very bright, he's very skilled at everything he does, and has lots of, friends, I guess. In particular, at school, he starts to excel, and there's a sort of university or college that he goes to, where he's excelling, and his main teacher takes a shine to him. His main teacher takes a shine to him, and sort of adopts, he becomes his favourite student, to the point where he's used to even going around his teacher's house and meeting his family and being, in and out of the house. So this is Ahimsaka. And what happens, unfortunately, is that this arouses the jealousy of his fellow students. And what they do is they want to bring him down a peg or two or more. And they concoct a story, a lie, that Ahimsaka has seduced the teacher's wife. And the teacher believes this. He believes that Ahimsaka, who has access to his house, etc., has betrayed him by sleeping with his wife. And he's full of jealous rage, as you can imagine. And what he says is, apparently there was a tradition that at the end of the sort of education, you could say like at the end of the graduation, you had to give a gift to your teacher in order to graduate, anything that they wanted. And what his teacher asks Angulimala for is a necklace of 1,000 fingers taken from 1,000 different people. And somewhere, his teacher must have thought, if Ahimsaka accepts this, then he's going to die, basically, in the process. And we're told that Ahimsaka, well, there are various accounts. One account is that he resists this and says, no, I'm he who does no harm. In another account, he just accepts. But even in the account where he resists, eventually he's convinced that this is the only thing to do. And perhaps his teacher was not just an academic kind of teacher, but his guru, his spiritual teacher. And the guru's word was absolute. You didn't disobey. Anyway, so he becomes... well, first of all, it's said that he tries to take people captive and persuade them to allow them to cut off their fingers. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, he tries to... Anyway, nobody's very persuaded to give up their little finger. And so he ends up pretty much killing people to get their finger. And he starts making this sort of garland of fingers. It's said that he hangs it on a particular tree until the rats get at it and the squirrels get at it. And so this kind of grotesque thing that he's making, one finger at a time, one human life at a time, he decides to wear around his neck. So now he's wearing, I guess it's just fingertips that he's wearing round his neck. Anyway, so that's a little bit about how Angulimala, so he's given the name Angulimala by the local frightened populace, Anguli meaning finger and Mala meaning necklace, and he's terrorizing the place. And yes, King Pasenadi has sent a small army, I guess, of soldiers to try and get him and capture him. What's also happened is that his parents have heard that King Pasenadi has sent these soldiers to trap the serial killer, and they suspect that the serial killer is their son. They kind of have that notion. And so Mala's mother wants to go and warn her son that he's going to be captured and executed, probably. So she's also left her house and gone into the forest in order to find Angulimala. So now you've got Angulimala, the Buddha, and Angulimala's mum all in the same forest, and it is dark now, apart from the moon. And you can imagine Angulimala's mother is in a panic. She's scared and desperate to find him. The Buddha isn't in a panic. He's just walking very mindfully. And initially, Angulimala is nowhere to be seen. So now we come to Angulimala himself, his perspective. And although he can't be seen, he is hiding, and he does see his mother. He does see his mother coming towards him. And it so happens that he has got 999 fingers and wants one more, needs one more, and only one more. And he's desperate to complete this task of 1,000 finger garland. And he meets, well, he goes towards his mother, and you can imagine, I mean, he's now more animal than human, probably. And you can imagine he recognizes his mother, she recognizes him, but in him there's also this, I need one more victim. And he's prepared to kill her. In the Buddhist tradition, I mean, murdering somebody is really bad, of course, really bad. Not just in the Buddhist tradition. But murdering your parents, killing your parents, your mother or your father, is a heinous crime. It's said to be like a crime that will propel you after this life into hell straight away. And there's no possibility, at least while you're in hell, of any redemption while you're down there. Although in Buddhism, interestingly, the hells, there are hells and there are heavens, but none of them are eternal. Yeah? No matter what you've done, you might spend a long, long time. Sometimes the texts talk about aeons, but it's not eternal, and that when your karma has been exhausted from whatever heinous crimes you did, you're reborn in a better place. Anyway, but killing your mother or your father would propel you into, that's the thing. So it's the worst you could do. Of course it is the worst in a way, isn't it? I know we don't always get on with our parents, but matricide or patricide, it's a bit like killing yourself or part of yourself. There's something very, very unnatural about it. Very, very unnatural about it. You know, I mean, I used to lose my temper with my mum, but you know, killing, you're murdering part of yourself. Anyway, so Angulimala's potentially thinking about attacking and killing his mother. The Buddha knows that this is going on. Somehow he's aware of the whole scenario, and he makes himself visible to Angulimala, who sees sense in a way and decides to attack the Buddha, who he doesn't know is a Buddha. He just thinks he's a monk. He's dressed in a monk's rags, and he's probably barefoot. Anyway, he just thinks there's a foolish monk on the loose, and so he doesn't go for his mother, he goes for the monk. And the Buddha is walking very mindfully, like a monk should walk, just, casting his gaze a few feet in front of him on the ground, and just walking very calmly at an even pace. And Angulimala starts tracking him through the forest, and then decides to go in for the kill and starts sprinting, to the Buddha. And the Buddha's just ahead, walking very calmly. And Angulimala is running now at full speed towards the Buddha. He's behind the Buddha, so he's chasing the Buddha. And the strange thing is that he doesn't seem to be getting any closer to the Buddha. So the Buddha's just walking at a normal pace. Angulimala's sprinting, and he can't catch up. He doesn't seem to be closing the gap. And he can't understand this. This has never happened to him. It's like he's in some sort of nightmare, hallucination of a nightmare kind of. I don't know if you've had nightmares where you're chasing or chase somebody and you can't get away or they can't. It's that sort of scenario. You don't get closer, and yet you should be getting closer, and there's no explanation for it. And he starts to not only become exhausted physically, but probably panicking. Like, what is this apparition of a monk? And now he's scared. And he just shouts out, "Stop, monk!" And the Buddha turns around and says, just very, very directly, he looks at Angulimala, who's sort of running towards him but getting no closer. The Buddha just says, "I have stopped. Now you stop." And what the Buddha meant was that I have stopped not my physical body, but I have stopped the drives of greed and hatred. And it is time that you stop. And that's what he explains to Angulimala. And Angulimala is completely flummoxed. I mean, he's flummoxed by this sort of miracle that's happened of time and space somehow not being what he recognized, and not being able to catch up with this monk. And then he's probably struck by the monk, or the Buddha, as it turns out, talking calmly to him, talking to him as if he was a human being, without any fear, and somehow with strength, but with kindness. And you can imagine that Angulimala hasn't been talked to like that for a long, long time. It's like somebody is seeing him as a human being, but isn't going to play the game that Angulimala is playing, this horrible game. And Angulimala, something in him, listening to the voice of the Buddha, seeing the Buddha, something in him breaks down. I imagine, I like to think, we're not told what it is, but I like to think that there's something about the Buddha's humanity, or in that response, that stops Angulimala in his tracks, and he breaks down, and he becomes a disciple. He becomes a disciple of the Buddha, and he is ordained sort of on the spot. He becomes a monk himself, a monastic disciple of the Buddha. So then what happens is, sometime later, King Pasenadi is visiting where the Buddha is, and comes to see the Buddha, and the monks gathered around the Buddha, and talk turns to this notorious serial killer, Angulimala, who's King Pasenadi thinks is still on the loose and on the run. And he tells the Buddha about it, and the Buddha says, what would you do if I were to tell you, no, if I was to say that Angulimala is now one of my disciples and is a monk, what would you do? And you can imagine the king's incredulity, and he just laughs, I think, and says, well, if he was, then I'd pay homage. If he was one of your monks, then I'd bow down. And the Buddha says, well, here he is. Here he is, Angulimala, come forward. And the king can't believe his eyes, but has to accept that, yes, this is Angulimala. And he bows down, he pays homage to Angulimala, and makes him an offering of a robe. Angulimala later, not just at that moment, but later becomes an enlightened disciple. He becomes enlightened. And in a way, that's partly what's so wonderful about this story, is that somebody who had committed such evil acts, caused such harm, can still become enlightened. That feels to me one of the key kind of lessons from this story, is that nobody is beyond the pale in terms of enlightenment. And that must be something to do. Remember, Buddhism doesn't have a creator God, it doesn't have a judgmental, it doesn't have a God, a creator God. So there isn't a higher sort of authority judging us for our actions, whether they be skillful or unskillful, as Buddhism calls them, or good or bad, or there isn't a judge. There is the law of karma. There is a natural order where the more we act from generosity and kindness, the more we will tend to experience joy and fulfillment, and of course others will benefit too. And the reverse, the more we act from hatred and greed, the more we'll experience harm ourselves and suffer ourselves in our own minds, and of course suffering will follow us in the world. But the law of karma isn't it's a natural law. It's not like an authority judging us and punishing or rewarding us. It's not like that. There must be something about enlightenment which is natural. In a way, the whole of the Buddhist path is natural. It's aligned with the order of things, the way things are. And there's something about consciousness which has enlightenment as its potential, as its fulfillment. Just as in an acorn, its natural potential is to become an oak. It doesn't need, I mean, yes, it needs the right conditions, but it doesn't need a supernatural agent to turn the acorn into an oak. I mean, you think about it, that's a sort of incredible event, an acorn growing into an oak. It happens so slowly that we never are sort of taken aback by it. But if we could speed up, in a time-lapse way, an acorn growing into an oak, that's an incredible, miraculous, but natural phenomenon. Enlightenment is a natural consequence of fulfilling our potential. It's a different order of consciousness, but that different order is within us, you could say, or at least the seeds of it are within our ordinary consciousness, our ordinary human mind. So it's said that no matter how badly we act, how far off the path we go, we don't ever destroy that potential. Does that make sense? We can't destroy it. I find that a very I don't know, hopeful teaching. Both those aspects, actually, that enlightenment is natural, it's a natural potential, and that we can never entirely lose touch with it, with that potential, no matter how far off the path we go. And Angulimala's story is a sort of extreme example. Hopefully none of us has done anything like kill 999 people. So, in a way, that means that there's hope for all of us. And it doesn't require some forgiving God, or vengeful God, for that matter. I've got one more thing to say. Maybe I'll say it after. We'll have a little break in a moment, and then Angulimala's story is almost finished, but there's another little bit more to say. But we'll have a break now, and if you're at home, well, go off and make yourself a cup of tea. We'll break for about 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 5 to 8. If you're in the shrine room here, you can't have a cup of tea. If you've brought your own drinks, then you can drink. But you can't really hang out in the reception area either. It's all rather awkward. You can go to the loo, sort of, not in a big crowd, or you could just stand up here and stretch your legs, but you can't wander around too much. Yeah. So let's pause for a few minutes. Yeah, we'll come back at 5 to 8, and when we come back, we can ask questions, and Paramabandhu and I'll kind of try our best to answer them. And if you're at home, you can put your question in your chat thing, and if you're here, just think about your question, and we'll take questions from both places. Okay, so see you in a few minutes. How many people have we got watching? 50. 50. 50.
That's probably the weather, isn't it? It's kept a few.
Yeah. And we've got about 15 in here? 15. We had 16 slots.
Robin's the other, so I brought him a lot to the Sunday school as well. The two boys. Normally they're sort of meditation together.
Okay, folks. So welcome back at home, and let's take our seats. Very good. So what we'll do is we'll take questions from the shrine room, you people who are here in the flesh, and then we'll alternate between any questions here and then any questions from you guys at home who might be typing anything in the chat box. And equally we'll read out those questions and we'll just respond. Yeah. And we'll do that for about, I don't know, 25 minutes, maybe half an hour. We'll see how many questions there are, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so anybody in here? Does anybody have anything that you want to? Yes, go on.
I was thinking about his teacher.
Ah.
And he somehow is the reason for his behavior. What happened to him?
Yeah, what happened to him?
And why did he, being in such a position of power, why did he say this?
Yeah, why did he say this? I've forgotten your name. Tell me your name.
Tio.
Tio. So Tio has asked, I'll repeat the question just in case he didn't pick it up on the mic. Tio was asking about his teacher and what happened to his teacher and why did he, given that he was a person in power, order Angulimala to Agnisaka to do such heinous things. Over to you. Paramabandhu?
Well, I think we don't know is the short answer, but maybe say a couple of things. So, as Jnanavaca mentioned, there are different versions. So, the version Jnanavaca mentioned was that envious disciples, other disciples, said that he was sleeping with the teacher's wife. Another version is that Angulimala, or Himsaka as he was then called, had a plot to kill the teacher. So another version is that he was just worried for his own life. And maybe the teacher knew this background prediction and therefore it was fearful of him, thought, well, he has actually got the potential to kill. So maybe he's scary. But we don't actually know, well, first of all, why he got into such a stramaz about it. Except to say, the other bit in the story is that, at least in one account, is that the other disciples who were clearly jealous of Ahimsaka had quite a good strategy, which is they divided themselves into 3 groups. So first of all, one group goes along and says, well, in this version I was reading, that, look, Ahimsaka wants to kill you, there's a plot against your life. And the teacher goes, no, don't be ridiculous, of course there isn't. And then the second group go and say, there's a plot against your life. And still the teacher goes, no, it's a ridiculous thing, it can't be the case. And then finally the third lot go and they say, and this time he falls for it. And I think what one could, learn from there is how hard it is to really, look for the best in people and not to, go on rumour. When we hear rumour about, adverse rumour about other people, I think it is very easy for that to affect our minds and to somehow, even if on a bit on a conscious level you think, oh no, well I don't really believe that, but somehow it does have like a slight poisoning effect. And I think, that is, what seems to have happened here in this case. And, you can imagine it just grew and grew in his mind, whether jealousy or fear of his life. And he thought, okay, I've got to get rid of this guy.
This isn't to answer your question, but to just pick up on what Paramabandhu was saying, one of the things I sort of take from this backstory, which I quite like, we don't really know the facts and we don't really know what happened, although, as you say, there are several different versions. What I like is that that there is a backstory with circumstances that led to Ahimsaka becoming Angulimala. And what I take from that is that when I meet somebody who, does me some wrong, it's easy for me not to think about the conditions that led them to that place. You can meet somebody in the street who's down and out, maybe drunk, maybe abusive. If you live in Bethnal Green, it's not uncommon to find, you run into people who are in a state, maybe through drugs, maybe through alcohol, they're homeless, whatever. And it's easy to dismiss people, if you see what I mean, and just think, he's a drunk, she's a drunk, and ignore them. I like the fact that what Buddhism asks us to do is to reflect on the law of conditionality and that everything arises in dependence upon a whole nexus of conditions, and not be too quick to judge, if that makes sense. I was just watching a little BBC iPlayer clip about the homeless and how this lockdown has helped some homeless people. And this was a homeless man in Manchester who had been down and out on the streets for 3 years, and in lockdown, because of government policy, he's been offered a room in a hotel. Never probably had such a space, and he's transformed, from this complete wreck of a man to somebody who's actually now helping, doing odd jobs around the hotel. He was watering plants, and his story was that he was living with his partner, and it was her home, it was her flat, and she got cancer and died. And because they weren't married, or anyway, it was in her name, he didn't inherit anything and was just made homeless and had no, it must have felt like no option. So do you see that suddenly, just in a few months of this, we're in a pandemic, and for him it was like salvation, this. And he said he was never going to go back to the streets. And you saw the before and after of the man just a few months in, and it was like, well, one of the hotel staff said he was unrecognisable. Anyway, I'm saying all of that just because I think I want to underline the fact that there's a backstory to everything, to everybody, to all of us. The conditions that have led any of us to be here are vast and many. In fact, there's a whole, well, Buddhism doesn't limit it to one cause. It says there's an infinite number of conditions behind any happening. Should we take a question from, if there is one?
There is one, yeah. So Oliver is asking if Buddhism also says that psychopaths or people with kind of extreme mental disorders can pursue enlightenment and are capable of change.
So another one for Paramabandhu. So I'll just repeat it for the mic. So Oliver asked, thanks Oliver, if Buddhism says that psychopaths, people who are extremely mentally unwell, are capable of enlightenment.
So, ask the retired psychiatrist, yes.
Yeah.
That's my problem. I don't, again, it's one where we don't have a definitive answer in the sense that, the term psychopath or psychopathy is a sort of Western term, and you don't really find an equivalent in the Buddhist scriptures, so you're in a bit of a problem then. So you're having, basically what I'm saying is you're having to interpret. It's not like, unless you want to consider Angulimala a psychopath, that's probably the nearest one has in the certainly in the Pali Suttas of somebody like that one could say, oh well, here's somebody in very difficult position who then does become enlightened. So I think it's very difficult to say from that point of view. We don't have a scriptural backup on that. The main thing is the Buddha would say is that, well, all humans have the potential for enlightenment. So from that point of view, one would think, yes, that somebody with a psychopathic disorder, to use that term, would have that possibility. I think it's so difficult to really know, at least if we're thinking in terms of enlightenment in this life. Remember that Buddhism thinks in terms of repeated lives. So presumably, just because you're for whatever the conditions were, which could be genetic from a Western point of view, could be genetic, could be to do with your upbringing, leads you to have that sort of so-called psychopathy. That doesn't mean to say that's going to happen in the next life. So you could imagine that in a future life there might be more advantageous circumstances in which to gain enlightenment. Now, from if I put my psychiatric hat on, probably what it would look like is depending how severe it is. I mean, it's said, that this sort of disorder has a tendency, at least for those who are not in the most extreme state, to sort of mature. So there's a sort of tendency for a maturation. a sort of human maturation. So that would suggest, a possibility of, therefore, sort of, following Buddhist ethics and so on, and making that sort of move. There's also, again, we don't know what the disorder is, but, there are accounts of, people, certainly in America, on death row who've converted to the Dharma and seem to have made real significant spiritual progress, which again I think is a very sort of hopeful, hopeful sign. I suppose the main thing is going to be whether someone can start to recognise that actions have consequences, whether they can start to recognise conditionality. That's going to be key, and I think one would have to look at that on a sort of case-by-case basis rather than making any sort of overall, pronouncements about people with such a disorder.
I mean, Buddhism requires us, doesn't it, to take responsibility for our actions, to own the fact that we're a moral agent, and presumably there might be illnesses, whether it's psychopathy or something else, where somebody isn't able to take responsibility for themselves. So that probably happens, yeah. Thank you, Oliver. Very good. So anybody else in this room? Hi.
Just continue along this line. I think it sounds like an amazing story to begin, but actually, when you think about it, some people who've reformed in prison, or people who suffer from severe mental illness because of what's happened to them, and then it's a very clear example. The Buddha changed the conditions forgotten his name now.
Angulimala.
Yeah, it suddenly changed the conditions and probably showed him some respect and some love. And I think things like that do happen. Ironically, one thing I work with is youth crime. It's the same thing again. Often the people who even commit the murders are people who are very, very vulnerable themselves.
Yeah.
And often there is an example where the youth workers and some people in camps and stuff can work with young people, and when you show them some love, it could be the first time they've been shown love, and it can have a dramatic effect. So what I'm saying, the story is like not just, he seems fantastic in a way, and a fantastic power. I think there's very practical sort of examples of that. And it's not just your backstory, there's also the positive thing about Buddhism is there's a forward story, isn't there?
There is a forward story.
So the fact we became a disciple, then that's that, and then more things would have changed.
Yeah.
And so it's also a really, really, really powerful example of impermanence and how the positive side of impermanence is the fact that the conditions that could have made things bad, changing the conditions can actually lead to a more positive path. So I think it's more of a comment really. I'm saying it's quite a powerful parable, has lots of practical ramifications.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that what you say about impermanence is really important to remember. We normally, I don't know, sometimes when we think about impermanence, we always think about things ending and the loss of things that we want or love or hold on to or hold dear. But impermanence also implies growth and change. And the other thing I find interesting about this story is that Pasenadi, King Pasenadi, doesn't try and exact revenge. He was the king. He could have, conceivably anyway, said, yeah, I don't care that you're a disciple of the Buddha or you think you're a monk. That's just a ruse to avoid being captured. I'm going to capture you anyway and imprison you or execute you or whatever. He could have done that. That's the sort of social order. He was in charge of social order, and the Buddha couldn't have stopped him, not physically. But he doesn't. The king respects the Buddha. He respects the spiritual order. That spiritual order that the Buddha represents is higher than the legal framework, the social order that the king represents. That's at least how I read it. I find it interesting that the king bows to Angulimala and even makes him an offering. You wouldn't find that happening in our... Do you know what I mean? We don't value the spiritual order as highly as it was valued in the time of the Buddha. I mean, yes, we don't have a Buddha around, but I find that interesting as well. Any more online? Shall we look?
So Mercia is asking about the scene of the Buddha being chased by Angulimala in the forest.
Ah, yes.
What it might say about the ideal attitude towards fear.
Ah, yes. So Messiah, hello. So Messiah's asking about the scene where the Buddha's being chased by Angulimala in the forest and what it might have to say about our attitudes to fear. Do you want to have a...
Yes. Well, of course, it said that the Buddha didn't have fear, that he'd overcome fear. There is an episode in the Buddha's life before he was enlightened, which I think is maybe quite helpful for us to think about. When he did experience fear, he was in the forest, which would be like this, although there wasn't, as far as we know, there wasn't any murderers around, but he was in... Snakes. Yeah, you got snakes, you got all sorts of wild animals. He experienced fear. And what he decided to do was basically to just experience the fear without letting it take control of his mind. So he allowed the fear to be there, so he didn't try and push it away, but neither did he let it take over his mind. And he just continued whatever he was doing. So if he was walking, he continued walking. If he was sitting, he continued sitting. If he was lying down, he continued lying down. And there's some very nice stories of, nearer to us, of wandering monks in Thailand in the last century, when there was still enough jungle to have monks going off and wandering. And there's lovely tales of, for example, there's one where a monk meets a tiger, and he just stays completely still, and it sounds like he enters into a meditative state. So that's the thing to do if you can, go into a meditative state when you're feeling fear. And then he comes round and the tiger's gone. And there's another one where a snake appears. And so the monk says to the snake, look, every day I cultivate metta to you and all beings. So kind of in parentheses, you've got no reason to do me any harm. Anyway, the snake wanders off and doesn't attack him. But so as I said, I suppose pre-enlightenment, what we've got is fear is going to arise. Part of being human is fear is going to arise. Basically, belief in a separate sense of self means that is in danger of being attacked or losing it in some form or another. So fear will arise whenever that sense of self is threatened. So whilst we still have that sense of self, what we need to do is simply just practice being with the fear, turning towards it, experiencing it, and not letting it drive us. What the Buddhist tradition suggests is that when our understanding is sufficiently deep that we no longer identify with a sense of self, that we've seen through the illusion of a sense of self, then in a way there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be lost, nothing to be gained. And so the Buddha could be completely without fear.
And for that, I can't imagine that not really. But my understanding is that the Buddha wouldn't have identified with his body, for example. So most of us fear physical harm, including death at the worst, as it were. But if the Buddha didn't identify with the body, if the Buddha was in constant contact with a level of consciousness that isn't limited by the body, that isn't limited by form, that isn't in this material phenomenal world, isn't actually even in space and time as we understand time and space. If the Buddha was, if his mind was in that state, in that realm, you could say, which is a realm of peace and freedom and bliss, if that was the case, then this physical form and all the sense experiences that we experience and that, as soon as you've got a body you experience, he wouldn't have identified those as anything to do with him particularly. There's physical form here, there's physical form here, there's physical form there. They're all just physical form, and he would have seen them as ephemeral, temporary manifestations of, you could say, sort of excitations of energy on the ground of this consciousness. That if the body lasts 100 years, or if it lasts 2 days, he wouldn't have seen that as much different. I don't know what that state is like, but that's how I reflect on it. Yeah. Harvey, you had a question earlier. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if Angulimala would have had to take any action to repent for his crimes, or if it's just enough to practice the Dharma and become a disciple of the Buddha to sort of write that.
Okay. I'll do it. Sorry, shall I?
No, I just wanted you
to repeat the question. Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks. So Harvey's just asked whether we thought that Angulimala had to, at any stage, repent for his crimes, or whether it was enough just to understand the teachings of the Buddha and gain enlightenment without any sort of repentance or remorse.
Okay. You're probably going to say a bit about this. There's another bit of this story, but I'll let you on. Yes, you want to say that, yeah. So,
there were some consequences. It wasn't just that he gained enlightenment and there were no karmic consequences. Now, I know that's not quite your question. Your question is, was there any internal kind of repentance? What seems to have happened with Angulimala is that when he encountered the Buddha, when the Buddha encountered him, he and the Buddha spoke to him. We don't completely know how much teaching the Buddha gave him, but insight seems to have dawned in Angulimala. He knew the truth of the Dharma. He saw it. He experienced it for himself. So he became what's called a stream entrant, which is somebody that's irreversible on the path, almost immediately. And then he must have practiced, and we're not told how long he practiced for and how long it took him to become fully enlightened. I can only presume that from that time he must have been fully aware of the harm that he'd caused and resolved to somehow, for the rest of his life, do good. What there wouldn't have been is guilt, in the sense that he wouldn't have been sort of neurotic about, oh, I'm therefore a bad man. He would have confessed his wrongdoings. He would have fully taken responsibility for them. I mean, we're not told this, but this is what the Buddhist path asks of us. Fully taken responsibility for our unskillfulness, and he would have done that. Confessed it. He would have felt remorse for the hurt that he'd caused hundreds and hundreds of people, including the families of the people that he killed. He would have done that, and he would have been able to, after sort of confessing it and feel remorse, he would have been able to put down the shame of it. He wouldn't have carried it around as I'm an awful man, I'm an awful sinner, in that continual neurotic way. But the consequences externally were that when he went begging for alms in the villages around Savatthi or in Savatthi, people recognised him, even though he would now have shaved his head and be wearing a monk's robes, which were probably more like rags. They recognised him and they wouldn't give him alms. And the monk is completely dependent on alms food for survival, and they wouldn't give him, they turn away. And then what's said to have happened is that one day there was a woman who was pregnant who was the pregnancy looked like it might go wrong. There was some complications with the pregnancy, and of course a lot of women would have died in childbirth in ancient India. So pregnancy was a difficult, dangerous time. And the Buddha says to Angulimala, maybe we'll call him a hingsaka, I don't know what to call him anyway. The Buddha says, go and go to this woman and assert that you have never done any harm since the day you were born. And by that asseveration, what's it called? Asseveration. Bless her so that her pregnancy goes smoothly and her child is born healthy. So by the truth of this statement, bless her. And Angulimala says, but I can't say that. I can't say that I've never done any harm since I was born. What are you talking about? And the Buddha says, okay, well, say to her that I've never done any harm since the day I was reborn as a monk. Since I was reborn on the noble path, since I took the noble birth, I've never done any harm. And the implication there being that he is born again. There is a rebirth, a spiritual rebirth. And the past, as far as his his consciousness is concerned, he can leave it behind. He goes to the pregnant woman and he says, I have never done any harm since I took the noble birth, and by that truth, I bless you to have a smooth and successful childbirth. And she does give birth successfully and to a healthy child. And the villagers and surrounding people since that day, they treat him with more respect, and he's said to become the patron saint of pregnant women, that protects pregnant women at that time. Before that, the villagers not only didn't give him alms, but they sometimes used to throw stones and rocks at him. And there was a time when he came back to the Buddha bleeding. He'd been hurt. Not only didn't he have any food, but he was now injured. And the Buddha says to him, look, this is the karmic result of your earlier actions, but because you've gained insight, the karmic results are tiny compared to what you were facing. You were facing lifetimes in hell. Now, yes, you've got some people throwing stones at you. That's tiny compared to what the karmic result would have been. So just bear it. Just put up with it. And he does. So that all came from the remorse thing. So we've run out of time. And I'm sorry if we didn't answer all your questions at home or indeed in this room. But we ought to finish now. I'm going to hand over to Paramabandhu to wrap it up.
Okay, great, thank you. So in a moment we'll do the transference of merits. Just before that, just a request for Dana. We always request for Dana. It's partly as you can see, are in the room. We can't get many people in the room, so we can't have such big classes as we were used to have in the past, and to keep the centre going, we very much need your support. So we really appreciate anything you can give, and the same for you who are watching online. And I think Hippolyte is just putting the link into the chat box. So yes, and many thanks for it. I know many of you do give already, and many thanks for that. It really, really makes a big difference. Both you here and online, and we really appreciate that. And anything you can give is much appreciated. So let's just conclude with the transference of merits, which will
just say one more thing.
Oh yeah,
That
sure.
from this Sunday, you may already be aware, but we've got the home retreat, our summer retreat, and if you haven't already signed up, you can register online. So you at home, you in the room, do register online. It'll be a great retreat. Starts this Sunday.
Jnanavaca will be teaching on it.
I'll be one of the leaders.
One of the teachers. Okay. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained.
In my acting thus.
In my acting thus.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.
Good. Thank you very much. If you've been watching at home, really wish you well, and bid you good night. So we're going to go off air any moment. So hopefully see you on the summer retreat very soon. Good.